here today to talk about immigration, and of course this is something that's in the news all the time. But we're going to talk a little bit more about parts of the immigration issue that you don't necessarily see and hear on the news all the time. The real story of American immigration, the full story, is much more nuanced. Yes, there are thousands of undocumented immigrants coming across the southern border every month, and that's created an asylum crisis that's gone from Brownsville to Buffalo. But that's just part of the immigration story. Other parts are much more positive. The U.S. Census Bureau reports that immigrants are generally younger than other workers and more likely to work in STEM fields. In other words, immigrants are helping fill the labor supply of a nation struggling with labor shortages. Moreover, according to a 2019 study by the New American Economy Research Fund, 45% of American Fortune 500 companies were founded by immigrants or their children. On a smaller scale, a study that I did here in Buffalo back in 2016 found that neighborhoods with high immigrant populations led the metro area both in business starts and in job creation. Yet all those positives get buried sometimes under the headlines about an American asylum system in crisis. Most of those desperate asylum seekers won't have their cases heard for years, and most will have their claims rejected. That means they will either have to leave the country or join the huge population of millions of undocumented immigrants living in the shadows all across America. So immigration is obviously a very complex topic, but today, thanks to Joblio and the Buffalo News, we have a panel of experts who can talk about this complex issue in full detail. We have with us today Darren Saxon, Director of the Office of New Americans for the City of Buffalo. Jennifer Rizzo-Choi, the executive, my notes went away, sorry. The Executive Director of the International Institute of Buffalo, one of the city's community agencies. Wooksoo Kim, Associate Professor of Social Work at the University of Buffalo and co-founder and director of the School of Social Work's Immigrant and Refugee Research Institute. And Bob Confer of Confer Plastics, who for years has employed refugees at his Niagara County business. So let me start with a question for Darren. Buffalo has, in the last 15 years, welcomed thousands of refugees from Burma, Somalia, and all sorts of other countries, as well as thousands of Bengali immigrants. How has this changed the city?
Well, it's changed the city for the better. The one thing that I feel that people overlook when they look at immigrants and refugees is they bring a unique diversity to our city, and Mayor Braun has definitely recognized that. That's why he began my department, the Office of New Americans, because the demographics have completely changed. And what's happening now, I think you're starting to see the people from the community understand that the demographics have changed, and some people are still a little resistant to, if you want to say, integrate with some of the immigrants and refugees, and we're trying to work with that. We have some programming coming down the line to try to see if we can foster, the communities coming together. But the biggest thing that I always tell people is immigrants and refugees want the same thing that you have, which is just the ability to have a better life, and opportunity to have that as well. And that's always just missed on people is the human element. No matter what group we belong to, as far as we look at, ethnicity or religion or whatever, but people just want to have the opportunity to have a better life. And, I'm glad they're here. I hope more come, and, we got a wonderful city.
Anybody have any other thoughts on that point?
Beautifully said.
Now, every social change comes with positives and negatives. So, break down the positives and negatives for us. Jennifer, why don't you try that?
I think I would defer to our company owner here to talk about the positives, because there's an amazing economic boom that's happening due to new labor supply coming in. Darren already talked about the other positive, which is diversifying our region, which is great. Buffalo's been an international crossroads for a century, though. Let's think about this. Let's go back 100 plus years to my family coming as Italians Germans even before that, the Irish, the Puerto Ricans, all the way through the post-war years, Jewish refugees down to Vietnamese, people from the Balkans, and today's populations. They've shaped our country. They've shaped our cities specifically, and we are so global and international today because of that. Having people come in now means that we're seeing so much growth. The West Side is an international hub of different types of foods. There's small businesses being started. Look at the 43 North competition. That was a lot of immigrant founders. So we're bringing in and we're helping Buffalo for the first time grow. The last census in 2020 showed population growth specifically in the foreign-born. 10% of the city's population is foreign-born, so that's only positive. I really would be hard-pressed to talk about the negative. To me, the negative is the political stuff and the policy stuff that has not been touched for years. But I would ask Bob to talk about what it's like to be able to fill your workforce with people who are able to help you move your company forward.
You're anticipating my next question.
Yeah, the changing demographics, if you look at everything that's happening now in the economy, you have a lot of people saying there's a labor shortage. Doesn't matter if it's private sector, public sector, people are short on people. So when you look at that trend, people think it's something new that started with the pandemic. It's something that's actually been festering. What I do is I look at school enrollments, because ultimately that's your pipeline. When you look at things that have happened up in Niagara County where I work, North Tonawanda, over 20 years that ended in 2021, had lost 37% of its school students in terms of enrollment. Niagara Falls was at 25%, Blackport was at 25%. They come across the border here to Erie County, Buffalo school enrollments had dropped by 31% over that same time period. So when you look at those numbers, that's the pipeline. Those students ultimately become the workers. So where do you find the new workers? Where do you find that new opportunity? And that's where immigration fits the bill, refugees, and it's been a godsend for us. Right now, I've got 150 people on my team, and of them, there are 12 different countries of origin. And when you look at that, there's probably 14 different languages that are spoken, and it works out incredibly well for us. The way we look at it is, as he mentioned, when you look at it is, in a way, the American dream. The American dream drives what we do in the manufacturing business, because we're providing the American dream not only to our customers, but to everyone within our building. So all my coworkers, how do we make everything better for them? Those individuals that came here from Burma, places like that, or Sudan, they came from a literal hell on earth. And when you look at America, that's the heaven for them. So we can provide them the opportunity to succeed within our organization and also to succeed outside of it. That would be in their personal lives, or maybe even to use us as a stepping stone to do better, to find a different job, to not only advance in our organization, but to pursue different things. Like one individual right now, he's a fellow from Sudan. He came from all that squalor, all that war. He's been with us for about 5 years, and now he's looking at getting a higher level job with the Postal Service, something he couldn't have done just 5 years ago because he hadn't mastered the language, life skills, things that we see and need to help them with day to day. And in a little bit, we could probably get into some of the struggles I see amongst them and how everybody in this room can help them succeed. And ultimately, that helps your organization succeed, and it helps the community succeed.
Tell us a little bit about the work ethic that you find about the refugees that you hire.
Oh, work ethic is absolutely incredible. There used to be this romantic version of the American work ethic. Whether that really stands to be true anymore, yeah, I don't know. But definitely those who are new Americans have that American work ethic. They don't miss time. And I'll throw 2 stories out there about an individual who came to us from Vietnam. He had retired just a couple years ago after putting in 20 years with the company. And he was such a hard worker that he had amassed 13 different properties that he saw as his retirement, that he saw those as being apartments and business rentals. He was such a hard worker that he was taking care of those 13 properties and still working with us. And he was so hard pressed to not miss work that at one time he had a heart ailment at the factory. As we got him out of the factory, he had to wave to me and say that he apologized and was sorry that he had to leave, even though he had that ailment. And another time, he was working on one of his properties in Buffalo. Someone shot it up while he was in there. Luckily, he was with a .22. He took a .22 bullet in the base of his skull, and he still came to work, and I had to force him to leave to seek medical attention. So that's the incredible amount of work ethic and care that individuals have from other countries, and you need to take advantage of that.
Now, the people you employ and a lot of the people that Dr. Kim would work with are refugees. People who worked very hard overseas to get here through a federal system that was established in 1980. Do you think the average American understands that and makes a delineation at all between those who've come through the system legally and those that they see on TV news right now? Dr. Kim, do you have any thoughts on that?
That question, I didn't prepare for my answers for that, but I have to tell you that there is a confusion around the categories of refugees, immigrants, and asylees. All these legal terms are not really familiar with the people, the public are not really familiar with them, and they kind of distinguish them sometimes they put refugees and asylees in the same category, or sometimes immigrants. Within the immigrants, there are immigrants and also refugee population. And there was a very valid question I heard from refugees, and what they were saying, one gentleman I was talking to, and he was saying, when do we stop being a refugee? I think that was an amazing question, because being a refugee, you are entitled to certain benefits in this United States. In the United States system, they are allowed to have some public benefits until certain years, which is not allowed for the immigrants. But at the same time, being a refugee, they kind of come with a burden of that being a refugee, you're labeled as refugee. Legally, I would say after resettlement period is over, which is 3 months, after that, they're immigrants. But we also, as a scholar, I have to say that those with a refugee background, they come with different burdens and baggages, different issues, different challenges than their immigrant counterparts who arrived here as immigrants. So distinction between them is probably for the good and bad, both of them. And I think we need to understand that their background, like what you said beautifully, they are really motivated, both of them, refugees and immigrants who chose to come to the United States. They are motivated to succeed. They are motivated to work hard and to better their future. That's their motivation, all of them. But they encounter different challenges and different setbacks. So once they arrive here, most of the immigrant refugees at the same time, both of them, they had dreams, American dreams. And I heard that some refugee camp, before they come to the United States, they have an orientation session. So what they get to see is a beautiful house. And in America, that's where you're going to live. Once they arrive here, they were placed in a city, sometimes substandard housing, right? So their gap between what they dreamed of, what they expected about America is quite different from what they face. So they need some adjustment around that. That's a huge challenge for them, too.
Jerry, can I just back on and just what Dr. Kim said, the one, I think, misconception is immigrants, refugees, and asylum seekers all get lumped together, right? So, because the one question that I'm always asked is, well, where do they get their money from? How do they have all this money? Well, I'm like, you do know everyone that comes here isn't necessarily a refugee or an asylum seeker. They can just be an immigrant immigrating from another country. It doesn't mean they were poor in their country. And I'll use our Bengali population, for example. Many of them have real estate back in Bangladesh, and I've actually had these conversations with them. They have real estate properties back in Bangladesh, and they typically had immigrated to New York City, and then they will come from New York City to here because they see the opportunity in Buffalo as opposed to New York City. But again, everyone kind of gets lumped together, and I mean, let's just be honest, our educational system in America on certain topics isn't the greatest. And most Americans were kind of ignorant to the differences of other groups. I'm just keeping it honest here. You asked me on a panel, I'm going to speak the truth. So we need to do a better job in educating ourselves, but also if we can get more information out, that would be great, just to help out in the situation.
If I could add on that, I guess I try to spend a lot of my time educating on the legal statuses. status. I'm an immigration lawyer, and you're right, everybody gets lumped into one category, because the bad part of this is the policy and the fighting and the fact that our government hasn't resolved the immigration issue in about 40 years. But just to clarify, people's statuses are determined by the law, and it largely traces to what was their journey here. If they were a refugee and they were able to flee their country like Sudan overseas and go next door to a neighboring country where the United Nations has set up camp, they then begin their process there. And they don't get to choose the US as their home. They could be, everything is decided for them. They have to go through an adjudication. They could then be sent to Australia or Japan or Europe, etc. But they waited in line, if you want to think about it. They waited in line there, overseas, and waited for someone to decide their future. That's different from an asylum seeker, also today referred to as a migrant, who came here, they migrated here, they didn't go through that Camp UN process. In fairness, they might not have been able to. They might have been coming from a geographical region where the UN didn't have a place for them to access. And so they showed up here by manner of smuggling themselves in on a barrel, or coming by a tourist visa on a plane, or they crossed at the Mexican border. And at that time, they then had to make a claim and say they wanted to stay. And so they then begin their case here. So they're seeking asylum, they're an asylum seeker. It's a very long legal process that's weighed down by a lot of bottlenecks. So that's the problem, because they're not allowed to pay for themselves, they're not eligible for welfare, as Dr. Kim referenced, and there's a long time until they get a decision. If they're granted asylum, then they become an asylee, and then they're a refugee essentially under US law. They're entitled to welfare, they get a work permit, they get the help and support of an agency like the Institute with a caseworker, etc. But they went through their process here on US soil, as opposed to waiting in line over there. And then there's also, just for confusing sake, there's like a whole bunch of other protected humanitarian categories along the way that have come up in recent years, like Ukrainians have a special designation, Afghans have a special designation, etc. And so all of that is all determined by the way our laws were set up in 1980 with the Refugee Act. And since then by Congress, to limit these flows in of people and control who's allowed to work in our country.
Now, I got the impression when I was doing a series on the refugees from Burma back in 2015 and 2016, that the big growth in the big initial growth in Buffalo's immigrant population was because of refugee resettlement. And that refugee wave kind of peaked in the late Obama years. It certainly went down during the Trump years, and it has not rebounded to the point that one might have expected under President Biden, because he had said that more people would be coming in, but they don't seem to be coming in. Could you just speak to that point and tell us what you think could happen if somehow more refugees were coming to the U.S.?
Sure. So the refugee resettlement program, which you're referencing, was started in 1980. It is very much driven by whoever's in the White House. They set what's called an admission ceiling every year, a presidential admission ceiling. And so during the Obama years, it was as high as 85,000 people were to be allowed in. And it's enjoyed very large ceilings since it started under Reagan, 50,000, 60,000. Obama had the highest year. When Trump came in, he took that ceiling down to 10,000. Between that and couple that with the travel ban and a bunch of other stuff going on, and what happened was the pipeline, if you will, the State Department pipeline for international people coming in as refugees, it atrophied. To be able to bring in that number of people, you have to have asylum officers overseas at RSCs, that's Refugee Service Centers, okay, and like Nairobi and big hubs in Africa. You need to have people at the State Department that can support those claims. You need to send immigration officers over there to do that interview process. I talked about how long it takes to get asylum here. Well, it takes that long over there because you have to go through and verify this person is who they say they are. This is what happened to them. Their claim is credible, especially if they show up without documents to prove who they are, which happens. People flee and they don't have time to grab birth certificates. I mean, it's just a fact of life. So all of those things used to happen overseas, and it was a very well-resourced pipeline that completely atrophied when a bunch of federal workers were laid off or walked off the job during the Trump years. So Biden came into office, and agencies like ours were like, are you going to open the pipeline up? Like, you've been making a lot of political promises. And so he did raise the ceiling immediately from 10,000 to 125,000, which is an amazing aspirational number that we've never done before. But the reality is that they need to resource that with officers and security checks and all the things we need to do to get people here. So I go to a conference every year with our network to find out about this. And last year, so first Biden year that they put in at 125,000, 44,000 were actually brought in. And then they had set a goal the next year to be at 65,000. And I believe this year they're hoping to get to 80,000. So even though that number is on paper, it's not actually going to be achieved. And in the meantime, you look at agencies like ours on the ground. Well, we're a nonprofit agency. We really suffered under the Trump administration because they cut our rivals, which cut our revenue. We're very lucky that our state and our lawmakers realized that they didn't want all of us to disappear because we were bringing in people that helped our region. And so they kicked us money through the state budget to help keep our doors open. And I think that's significant to talk about because if you look at New York, there are 8 resettlement agencies that exist that are doing refugee resettlement. There's 4 in Buffalo, 2 in Rochester, 1 in Syracuse, 1 in Utica, 1 in Albany. And none of us closed our doors. However, 100 resettlement agencies closed their doors around the country due to the Trump cuts. It's unfortunate, it's a fact though. And so they're now trying to restart up. I've heard of agencies contacting us wanting to get certification and get set up at the State Department. So that's a big part of it. It's like you have to resource the pipeline to be able to get that number in. But then you have to have receiving agencies here that have their doors open that can help. So, you know, the political ramifications of changes in administration and rapidly changing that emission ceiling has had untold economic consequences, I think, over the last 5 years.
Could you speak to that as someone who hires refugees? Do you think that if the inflow of people coming had been a little bit more steady, that labor shortages wouldn't be what they are?
Yes, you're correct there. When I look at the risk, like right now when you have the state saying maybe we should fast track some of the asylum seekers, that puts employers at risk because you can't really vet someone properly. Like we've been a long time member of the image system through the federal government in terms of verifying status. You take that away and you get the federal government out of the mix, and all of a sudden you're putting a lot of responsibility on employers that they shouldn't have to handle. Because we're caught between the state and federal government at that time. Now you have refugees that have a defined status, makes it much easier to go through the process of bringing them on and not worry about them leaving if it's ultimately determined that they're illegal.
Right, because they would be stable, they would be here for sure.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Look at Florida.
Do you feel like the supply of potential workers today, how does it compare to 7-8 years ago when refugee resettlement was peaking?
I had mentioned that festering decline in available workers. It's magnifying since they've cut off the pipeline. Like the pipeline was known, it was true that we could go in and we could always get people. It's even a struggle now. We wanted to fill a few positions at the plant lately, and we wanted to bring in some refugees, and the organizations we went through didn't have any applicants for us, which was highly unusual. You go back in time just 4 or 5 years, there would have been plenty. But now that they've found their status, they've found their homes, both in the workplace and in the community, it's a different story.
Mm-hmm. Yes, Dr. Kim?
So I just wanted to add to that, the flow of labor force, the supply of labor force and needs should be met at a certain point. And like IIB, International Institute of Buffalo, is doing a great job in matching those needs here. And the people who are looking for workers and people, the refugees or immigrants who are looking for work. And that, I think the goal is to smooth up that process or systematically make it more approachable for both workers and the employers. So what I learned from the refugee community is that how do you learn about your job place is word of mouth. Most of them learn that one of them started to work in the one company, then you suddenly have Somali, like 6 of them, 7 of them. And the employers are happy about them, that they keep having their friends coming in there. I think there is a lack of some kind of system that can open up new opportunities for employers and also the workers. That was.
A question for you, Darren. You mentioned the population gain in the city of Buffalo, which is so significant. In light of the fact that the number of refugees coming to town is not the same, do you have concerns that the population will stagnate, or has Buffalo become such a destination for immigrants of all kinds, is it more likely that the population will continue to increase?
I think it goes back to what Dr. Kim said. So within the community, there's communication about, for example, employment. Well, the same happens on the level of opportunity. So again, they have family members, meaning refugees, immigrants, and asylum seekers have family members within the United States, and they will move across the country to be with their family. So to answer the question, I believe it's going to increase. Now, what rate of increase? I mean, that can be debatable. But I remember about 2 months ago, back in the summer. So back in June, I'm sure you saw the live feed of the Ecuadorian migrants at police headquarters and fire headquarters, where we were able to find them. So the story behind that, most people don't know the story, so let me tell you the story. I get a call like 7 a.m., 8 a.m. On I think it was a Wednesday morning from the mayor's chief of staff. One of the deputy fire commissioners saw some, I would say, we'll call them migrants, Ecuadorian migrants outside of police fire headquarters, and they were asking for help. So he, with a kind heart, let them in. So I get a call from the chief of staff telling me that and said, hey, can you go help? They're homeless, they don't have any place to stay, can you help with the situation? So I get there, it's actually 18, and it's 7 adults and 11 children. So the reason why they came to Buffalo, they were in New York City. They heard there was farm work here. So they came, they paid their own way here. They weren't part of the busing situation from NYC. They paid their own way here to try to find farm work, but they didn't have a place to stay and so on and so forth. So the International Institute of Buffalo was great with the contacts of helping me. Well, they were helping me get to people who we could try to find housing, because the issue is with emergency housing, everyone is basically tapped out. They have none. They're overpopulated. The Vive shelter was great. You know, they have a capacity of 120. They were at 150 at the time. So they couldn't help us. So then we eventually was able to get to 211 to find an overnight stay for, the group, so they could basically have some place to stay. And then the next day, Vive was able to they bused them back to New York City, and they paid the cost because there was literally nowhere for them to stay. So, but the reason why they came was because of that word of mouth. And just so people too, I'm sure everyone in this room knows, but maybe someone watching doesn't know, their story of this group was they literally walked from Ecuador to the Mexican border. They went, once they came through the Mexican border, the point of entry, they were then bused over to San Antonio. Then they were flown from San Antonio to New York City. So then they took the bus to Buffalo on their own. They had some work, I believe under the table work in Queens and New York, and that kind of ran out. So then they ended up basically leaving there to come to Buffalo for the work, and then they went back. So yes, it's going to increase. I know I said a lot.
So this group, because I was on phone calls with you, it was like 8 o'clock that morning. So this group is an example of asylum seekers or migrants. And why are they being shuttled all around? Well, they're not legal to work. They don't have work permission in the category that they're in. They need to start the process. Even if they had filed for asylum that day at fire headquarters, it still would have taken 6 months to get a work permit. And so then you add in the category of, okay, who's going to pay for them, right? So that was part of our discussion, because most of the agencies like mine we're funded by federal and state money. You have to qualify for our program for us to pay for your housing. And people who are in this category don't qualify. Which is why they end up being shipped back to New York City to get into the hotels that were set up and paid for by New York City, ultimately by New York State dollars, because those are people who are in that limbo situation. But let's just, if you step back from there, the real issue here is that people come in and they're seeking work, but our system doesn't allow them to work. And that delay in time creates a charitable need that no amount of International Institute or VMA shelter can possibly fill. And the government, the federal government, isn't addressing it, right? And so then you put a burden on a city like Buffalo or New York City, because we can't have 18 people with little kids sleeping outside on the street outside of fire headquarters. It's just not safe for anybody. You know, and this situation has happened, this is just a small example, it's happened in Chicago, and Philadelphia, and New York City. New York City is beyond its ability to serve people. They have over 100,000 people in their homeless shelter situation that are migrants, and they don't even have enough hotels to put them in.
So, to talk about the population growth for the refugee population specifically, is that based on the data I got from Office of Refugee Resettlement, between 2002 to 2019, we, Buffalo area, resettled about 16,500 refugees here in Buffalo. Right now, based on the 2020 census data, as you mentioned, that 10% of Buffalo population is foreign-born population. So what that means is that, even counting those undercount of the foreign-born population, they tend to not participate in census that much. We have grown so much. And growing the trend that we can expect and we can project is really two functions there. One of them is having the community exist here when people, the word of mouth out there, like a Bengali community started to grow because they have some people here. When they come here, they have support system built in here. They can, they will face less challenges in terms of like adjusting to the new environment. That's one function. The other function is the city, our society, how we accept them, right? So Buffalo is known to be the city of good neighbors. That means that we really emphasize the friendliness and communities as our real, important values for us. So having that, I think that helps. And the other thing is that in the past history, so let's say that Buffalo's history and economic development tells us that two of those factors are really close tied to the immigration. So Buffalo, like any other Rust Belt cities, we have learned that economic development come hand in hand with the immigration population, newcomers. So we have a very good reason and motivation for adopting more initiatives and policies to that welcome newcomers at the city level, at the county level. Those are the things we could do, knowing that there aren't much going on in the country as a whole.
Jerry, I'm sorry, because I didn't want that story to go by.
That I told without thanking Buffalo Fire Department and the Buffalo Police Department. Everyone within that building was wonderful, meaning they went out of their own pockets and brought food for the families. They brought diapers for the children. They brought toys in, and they were really concerned and making sure that they had found a place. So it wasn't myself, it was the entire, I just want to make sure they get credit as well because they were wonderful during that time.
I want to go back to the point that Bob raised about the difference between trying to hire refugees who are vetted and this new group of migrants that's coming in. Bob, is there anything that could be done in terms of work permits that would make it better, that would make the vetting more certain so that you would be knowing that you're getting an employee that, really was someone who you want to hire?
My simple answer would be just to have the state and the federal government work together on it. Because right now they're just butting heads. And the state says, here, fast track this for us, and there's been almost nothing coming from the federal government in that regard.
Does anyone else have any thoughts on that question?
I do. If I could only just rewrite our law. So before I offer my opinion, let me just explain the context of it. The reason why work permits are delayed for people who are seeking asylum is because a long time ago, like 20, 30 years ago, there were a lot of people who came in from Haiti who filed asylum applications because they wanted work permits, and it was determined that people were abusing the asylum system process just to come here and work. So frivolous filing of asylum claims. And so at that time, the government passed a rule, they did a rulemaking process to delink these things and say, okay, you file an asylum application, and then you have to wait out an employment authorization document, EAD. The EAD clock is 6 months until you can then file the EAD application, which is going to take another like 3 to 6 months to get. So you're looking at 1 year between when you file for asylum until when you can maybe get that work permit, okay? That happened because of an abuse of the system. Also, I'll mention that our system for humanitarian protection is based on being able to stay here if you've been persecuted based on something you cannot change about yourself. Your political opinion, your particular social group, your religion, your nationality, so ethnic group, gender identity, etc., things you cannot change. Our asylum system is not based on economic need. So if you come here and you make a claim and say, I can't go back to Haiti because there's no work and my family is starving, that is very sad, but that is not going to grant you relief here. And so that's how that EAD thing happened, right? Because a lot of people were showing up for work and using that system as a process. So it got delinked, but that was a long time ago. And our economy was different, and our labor force was different. And we haven't updated anything, and in the meantime, we also haven't changed any laws other than add more people at the border for security. And so now when you have these big groups of people coming in, there's like two things going on here. We have so many jobs we can't fill, and we have people showing up who could work them. So, really revisiting that rule is essential, and unfortunately, I don't think it's going to happen due to politics and an election season and everything. But if I could wave a magic wand and write law, I would say, how about you create a special immigration status for these people who show up that's temporary? Maybe it's a year, okay? Let's call it some type of parole for a year and you get a work permit. No welfare eligibility, okay? But you can at least work for a year. We make them register, sign up, check in. Maybe they have to wear some type of monitoring thing that comes home, or I don't know. But that way we don't just lose them in our country, but they come back every year and they're checking while they wait for their case to be processed. So it's a combination of you must file for asylum, then you get that EAD permit. Let's say you have to file within 30 days of entry, okay? And you get a 1-year work status while you wait. That way we can give some assurance to Bob here that if he hires somebody and he invests time in training them, that he's gonna get at least a year of work out of them. And then in the meantime, I would ask our elected leaders to resource our immigration pipeline with enough officers in the US and enough judges and enough prosecutors to be able to put people through their court process, so that it is not waiting for 5 years, which is what it is right now. It's anywhere from 3 years to 10 years, depending on where you live in this country. I yesterday just looked up what the asylum processing wait time was for a case that's in LA, this person that transferred here, and I looked it up, and she filed in 2018. She interviewed in 2019, and she's still waiting. And it looks like it will be 5 years. She's just waiting. It's not like she's been denied. It's not like it's gone for additional review. She's just waiting for that officer to sit down, write up the notes, and render a decision. So, these people could be working, but you have to, A, give them the work permit. You can't make them wait a whole year to do that. You can't put all that burden on the city or agencies like ours, okay? And in the meantime, create a process that you can at least check and make sure that they're paying taxes, that they're showing up for their appointments, have enough, use your enforcement mechanism to keep track of people so that way they don't disappear. Because right now when people show up, they're not going to be like, oh yes, we'll just wait a year. No, they're going to try to find a way to eat and pay for their family. And they're going to start working in the underground economy, right, where no taxes are being earned by our government. And people like Bob aren't able to benefit because he can't hire them because they're illegal workers.
Would there be political resistance to the kind of system you're suggesting? I would have thought that there would be kind of a pull factor, that if migrants could quickly work here illegally, that more and more migrants would come.
So that was the concern with the Haiti example from years ago, that we were concerned, our country was concerned in the history books that I read, in law school, that we were not open for business for everybody. And I see that argument, I do, but I think that was a different time and a different economy. And while we continue to have our lawmakers not meet and discuss and decide what to do about people coming in, we're just hurting ourselves in so many different ways. We have a 4-year political election cycle, and it's become more and more partisan. And so this topic is always weaponized, unfortunately, and never really deeply discussed, and so we never see progress. So, you know, you're the reporter who covers all the politics and things, so you could tell me what you think, if you think it's going to change or not. But I look at it from this system, and I think nothing's going to change until we get through this next presidential election cycle.
We've had president after president come and go, and yet no immigration reform since 1987. What do the rest of you think about that? And do you think there is any hope of Congress ever in our immediate future addressing this issue? Sound of silence.
You know, I'm going to just talk. The immigration is a contentious issue because when accepting newcomers into the country, it inevitably brings in some of, you know, the social, economic, and political consequences. But we also know that throughout the history, in the United States, the influx of immigration comes with our needs and also economic prosperity. So what it tells us is that the United States need people to come and work in the cities to economic running. That's the truth. So here, right now, what we need is, you know, having these immigrants, and especially for the Buffalo, like Rust Belt cities, other small cities, those immigrants and refugees who are coming in, they diversified our demographics of the city, and also it revived our economy. So I think the truth and the historical lesson is there. If we really think about what the benefit of accepting people, we have to develop some kind of systematic way of accepting people. I can totally understand that, you know, people do not want to open up totally, and the illegal immigration is a problem. Then, as you just mentioned, we have to develop a system that open up a legal immigration door as an alternative, so that we can have the flow of immigration coming in, and help the economy will keep growing in this country. But I don't have an answer for you if it's going to happen or not, right?
Okay, so some of the things I want to say will be better left for us talking about it over drinks. But the one thing that I cannot understand, and Jenny is the one that kind of got me thinking about this probably a year ago, which I just still cannot process. If you're going to let people into the country, why not let them work? If you're not going to allow them to work, why are you letting them in the country? And I'm just saying that in the sense of because you're putting the burden on, again, you know, tax dollars and so on and so forth. Also, you make it seem as if this group of people is just living off of taxpayers, which doesn't help the optics and the view, because now people have disdain towards these groups of people because they're like, oh, you're draining our system and so on and so forth. But if you talk to most refugees, migrants, and immigrants, they want to work. It's not like they just want to come here and have a free ride. And as Bob eloquently stated earlier, they work hard. So why not allow them to work? And quite honestly, because of the lack of English proficiency, I can't even speak English now, English proficiency, they're typically working jobs that most people don't want to work, like the meat packing plants during COVID. I don't know if everyone remembers that. Or if you go down to Florida now and look at the issues they're having with completing homes, and also I know someone who owns a tree nursery. And, you know, he says his hardest workers are always I don't want to misspeak on the term, so please help me with this, Jenny. What is the visa when people can come across and work?
Agricultural fields?
Correct.
H2A.
H2, okay, thank you. So they will come and work as nursery during that period, and then they will go back. But when they put a block on that now for a while. I believe that was back in, 2016, 15, somewhere in there. He lost a lot of workers, and he couldn't find, if you want to say, American workers to come and do the hard labor and so on and so forth. So it's the classic lie with no matter what it is in this country. You stoke fear around certain things to make people think, oh, they're trying to take that job from you, or they're trying to take something from you. Oh, you can't buy a house because they're buying all the houses up and they're taking it from you, so on and so forth. So yes, the government needs to do something to also help the optics too, because again, you're putting a group of people in a bad situation and they had nothing to do with that as well.
What's kind of difficult here, I think, economically, is that programs like the farm worker program that you referenced, I've had farmers for years complain to me that it's just not bringing in enough workers. And in terms of the visa program for people with tech skills, that too is very limited. We're right across the border. We have a country that's much more generous in those terms. So we have a system right now where basically people are crossing the border at will, where while we don't have a system to bring in larger numbers of the kind of workers we need, is there anything that can get politicians focused on that truth?
In most cases nowadays, it seems like Congress can't work together, but they always work together when stuff hits the fan. So ultimately what's going to happen if you had to bust out the economic tarot cards, look ahead 5 years from now. When you look at the development specifically of the microchip factories, you've got the one in Clay that claims it's going to have 10,000 jobs. Then you look at the support jobs related to that, which is going to be across the state, another 5,000 jobs. And that is just one of 8 different microchip factories that the federal government has piped billions into. So once they see that this labor shortage is so significant in the next 3 to 5 years, that will cause everything to change. But once again, it takes a crisis to happen to get people to work together in Washington, and that's going to be the crisis.
Interesting. Any other thoughts?
I agree with you on that too. I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think I can't give you a US example as much as I can say if you look around the globe. I mean, lots of countries, wealthier first world nations, have migration needs and issues. Like look at where the World Cup was held. I forget what country hosted the World Cup in the Middle East. Qatar. Yes, I'm not a soccer watcher, but they had to build, over a course of 10 years, they had to build a ton of stuff, a bunch of stadiums, right? And so what did they do? They brought in a lot of labor. And to do that so quickly, because they had a need, they had to be ready, they almost didn't get awarded the World Cup, right? My concern in this type of example, like you're not talking about microchip factories, is when we finally hit that, like, oh, we do need labor, I want to make sure that people are brought in and treated well, and that we don't exploit them like we've heard in other settings, right? So there needs to be an actual established plan. All we've had done since, the 80s was one big reform happened, and then after that it's been little nibbles at, okay, well we need nurses, so we'll create a special visa for that. Okay, well we need people to invest here, so we'll create the investor visa, But we haven't actually ever overhauled our immigration system. And that's why our neighbor to the north, Canada, is doing so well, because they did overhaul their immigration system. It is not based on family or ties, it's based on need. They give like a point system based on, do you have a US, do you have a Canadian tie? Do you have the critical need skills? They have a short list of categories they need to fill, and that's how they're able to bring people in quickly. We can't come to agreement on that, and so we've done these little nibbles and like H-2As and nurses and et cetera, but maybe some big economic need that hits us in 5 years will force that forward. And if so, then I hope an intentional discussion happens at the same time about treating people well and bringing them in and not, just carting them in to work at this place and then shipping them back. Because that's never going to work either. The minute you bring people into your community, they become part of you. And if you mistreat them, then you create a subclass, and that, as we've seen historically, never works. So we have to make sure that people who are allowed to come here should be allowed to stay here and are meaningfully supported in that as members of our community.
So, can I add to that? Yeah. So in my research, I study Asian refugees, which is a very relevant population in Buffalo. So their goal is integration into the host society. When you say treat them well, that's exactly what needs to happen with this population. A meaningful employment with adequate wages can really improve their the economic security and dignity, so that will help them have a good health and mental health. So if we treat them well and find a good gainful employment for all of them, and with a good, nice the wages, will lead us to have happy and productive members of the society that added to our economy and the society as a whole. So treat them well is very, very important. And I also wanted to mention some of the challenges they might have. Do you want to move on to that later?
Yeah, go right ahead, challenges.
So I'll just quickly go over a few challenges, because my assumption is that you are sitting here because you're interested in hiring new talents and talents coming from immigrant and refugee populations, right? So those who came to the United States as refugees or immigrants, the first barrier or first challenges, as you can imagine, is language. So language barrier is there. And the more problematic with that is that because they're working, all the workers are working, they don't have time to invest on their language skills. So they cannot really attend the ESL instruction programs. So one program I am involved as a program evaluator is a workforce development program that is run by Erie County. What they found is the number one barrier for job promotion for them is that language. So what they decided is using the program funding, they created an on-site ESL program. I think it is brilliant. This is a great idea. I'm hoping that, to make this program better, I wish they created some kind of mechanism that the employers can support these workers, ESL workers, to attend the ESL program as professional development or job training, so that they get paid for that time. That's my ideal one. The second thing that list of the challenges they face is racial discrimination, racism, in combination with their language skills. So I would call it languageism. So they get discriminated because of their low English skills. So one worker was asked to work on 2 machines. He was working on 2 machines, so busy, and quickly he noticed that just next to him, there were 2 workers working on 1 machine. How bad is that? So he got so frustrated, and I was talking with a life coach who was working with him. My immediate question is that, did he get paid more than the other workers? No. So he tried to make a case that I cannot do this any longer. This is too much work for me. But he couldn't do it because in this unequal treatment situation, number one, his English is not good enough to make argument about it. And the second, some employers prefer certain group of refugees to others because culturally, some group of people, assertiveness is not really encouraged in their culture. This one, on the surface, probably there's no problem. Nothing is bubbling up, but I don't think it can be sustainable. So last thing I want to just quickly mention is their mental health. They need a lot of support. In one of our studies, what we found is the Burmese refugees, about 50% of them had trauma symptoms that warranted further examination, and 20% of them had depression. So they look okay on the surface, but they need a lot of the support to continue their job and have the life they deserve in this country. One thing that I wanted to mention was that, we're talking about their legal status and what they go through. Everybody's experience is different. We cannot group them in one way or the other. So what I would ask to many people is to ask them. And the best way to work with the immigrants and refugees are to immerse in their culture. If they bring you food that you're not familiar with, be curious and talk with them. I think that they would be very welcome to explain and share what they have. They would be proud of doing that. And without our reaching out, the people who arrived here first or generations before, if we don't reach out to the newcomers, to them, and there is no, it's not easy, I have to say that, it's not easy to learn about the challenges and triumphs they may have so that we can really work together.
Does anyone else have any thoughts on the challenges?
You speak about a lot of things that I love to hear and that we live every day in the factory, so thank you. And it's critical. She had mentioned that trauma is a big issue. You have to deal with that. We see PTSD among the Burmese and Sudanese quite often. And to put it into perspective, if you're working in an employment agency or a workplace that has uniforms, even be careful with uniforms. We've had individuals come through the factory on tours, and these were young military cadets. It actually frightened a few of our refugees because they had grown up in communities where the military and their nation would patrol and kill. So the one fellow ran into the restroom to wash his face underwater, to douse water on his face, to calm himself down. So that exists every day. And I look at the individual from Sudan, he just spent 2.5 months over there because he had to move his mother out of Khartoum. So you heard everything about the civil war that was taking place over there. He wanted to make sure that she didn't get killed. But the frustrating thing is that he could never bring her to the United States as a future citizen without going through a rigorous process. So he had to move her throughout Sudan to get her away from the danger. So that exists day to day. And what I look at it is, employment's an E-word. The other E-words related to that are, as you speak, education, empathy, and engagement. And those are absolutely critical. When it comes to educate yourself first. As she mentioned, realize what's happening over there. Realize what's happening in their lives individually. It's tough to say to look at what people might consider to be national news here. I don't want you to really go to CNN and Fox and all that to get your news. Read his studies on what happened in Burma. That was a great series of stories that you did. It was probably 8 years ago.
Almost seven.
Yep. So make sure you go back in time on Google, check that out. And even there's a blessing that we have here being at the border. Pay attention to the Canadian news. The way that they preface global news is the way that we have to look at it to understand the people there. So once you educate yourself, make sure you educate your coworkers because they have to understand. So what we did when the Burmese first came to us, it started off as one. As you mentioned, with word of mouth, all of a sudden 2 weeks later, there's 15 people from Myanmar lined up at our door that want to fill out applications. So that's how it started, that's how it went. What we did for the coworkers that existed at the workplace at that time, the employee newsletter of that week, I did 2 pages of everything that they lived through in Myanmar and what to expect, how to treat them. So that way they became educated on those issues. But you also have to educate the partners outside of your building as well, because you have people that provide services to you, whether it's your HMO, your insurance carrier, and even health services. And to put that into perspective for you, there was a health service organization around here in Western New York to which we would send our coworkers for their pre-employment physical. Individuals in that office that we later found out would roll their eyes when someone would come in and they would say, Burmese Bob Confer is at it again, because they didn't want to deal with the language issues and the other impasses related to that. So it took it upon myself to educate them on that. So once you go from the education standpoint, then you get to the empathy, which is related to that. You have to understand these issues. That fellow from Sudan, we gave him that 2.5 months off so he could go take care of his mother. A lot of workplaces would probably perceive him to be disposable and not allow him to come back to just say leave and don't come back, things like that. And then you have to look at different issues. One thing that we did is just a tiny little nuance related to the trauma and the other issues of culture. We opened up a prayer and peace room in our factory just 2 years ago, and that's so individuals, whether they're Karens who might be practicing the Catholic faith, or it may be Muslims or maybe Hindu. They have a place to go. And it's also the peace room, because when you hear about all these issues that are still happening back home in Myanmar, that gives them a place that when they see it on the national news that may be playing on the TV in the factory, they can go up there and rest during a break, collect their thoughts, and take care of that. So that ultimately leads to engagement and just getting them engaged.
Sounds like you're the type of company that I would want to come work for, candidly. That was so beautifully described. I was curious to understand how your company, not only the people that you brought in and went through the 4 E's, and it sounds like you went through a progression yourself. It sounds like it's almost changed you as a person. But how is the company benefited? If you could list maybe 3 things that as a result of your passion, integrity for these 4 E's, how has it demonstrated results more from a business perspective for you guys?
So related to that, I always tell people all the time, there's always the altruism and the good stuff, but when you want to sell someone on it, I always have to look at it from a capitalist big standpoint. So when I do that, I look at the return on investment. When you look at how much we put into someone to get them trained to be that machine operator, to be that maintenance person, it's going to take weeks, months, even years at a time. When you have someone that's dedicated to being there every single day and ultimately dedicated to you, the rewards are going to be substantial. And I look at one Burmese individual who left us to go to Fort Wayne, Indiana, because that's where another significant Burmese population is. He left us a note and gave it to us because he couldn't speak too well in English, but he gave us a note that said, God put us together. So that's the sort of thing that makes me feel good, because we gave him the chance, and as I mentioned, they're coming from that hell on earth and now coming to heaven. We can see the organization develop, but we can also see the community develop through individuals. So by allowing people to progress in learning English as their second language and ultimately make that their primary language, that's pretty special. And to see them find financial reward, one thing that was a struggle, and that's why I find your office to be an absolute blessing, is prior to that office being created, there was an impasse where leaders in this county did not know that the Burmese individuals were here. So when crime really hit them, they said, we didn't know they were here, we didn't know that crime is an issue. This came from leaders at the county level and also at the city level. And that's kind of frustrating, because at that time, there were 6,000 to 9,000 Burmese people living in Erie County, but they weren't known to exist. So were they hidden? No, they weren't. So they need a voice, they need representation. So by doing what we do at the factory to empower people, they can get engaged with their elected officials. They can do things that are completely American. We had 6 individuals from Myanmar head to Washington, D.C., where there was a rally to talk about the atrocities that were going on in Myanmar. Had they done that back home, they're getting gassed, shot at, and put in jail. So there's a lot of rewards that are the capital rewards, but there's also the altruistic rewards, and seeing good things happen within our organization, within their homes, and also out there in the community. Because it's empowerment. So ultimately it's taking them from being new Americans, scratching off that new, and realizing that they are Americans.
So Bob, it sounds like you started with one and then it grew from there. I presume it's had some impact, because it's difficult to find employees really in any sector at this point. I think we have 38,000 jobs open just in Western New York in manufacturing alone, which is a huge impact on our economy here locally, but that's every community across the U.S. So I'm just, but you started with one and then went on a journey, right? Many people who have not been used to hiring new Americans or refugees or a new population, that they don't understand. I can't even pronounce your name. I'll call you Kim.
Wooksoo.
I apologize. But most people have to see the long-term benefits of this to make the investment, right? In getting the first one on board. And that's why you feel like in educating the rest of the business population here, it's important to understand the implications on your business, because most of us are coin operated in some way. No money, no mission in some regards. And it seems like you have a very pragmatic experience that has helped. You see what I'm saying? People are still going to look at it from a business perspective. We can be altruistic, but there's still a business implication, et cetera. So can you comment on that? Has it helped ultimately the business?
Yes, in terms of quality of work, it's significant because it's a generation of workers that were doing blue-collar work. And then when you look at the need for, especially in the STEM category that he mentioned, that a lot of individuals working in STEM now are actually the new Americans. And that comes from survivability leading to ingenuity. So the skill sets they picked up overseas, we had one fellow from Bosnia who was in our maintenance department. He picked up his skills for hydraulics, electrical, maintenance by being in the military over there. There were other individuals, such as a fellow from Vietnam, who actually goes home at night to use his mill and lathe to make the work knives that our work crew uses to cut plastic. He learned that skill set from being an active participant in the Vietnam War back when he was at home. And then there's another individual I know of from Myanmar who actually became a machinist in another organization because the government there trained him how to build bombs. And that's a skill set that's kind of an odd skill set, but he transferred it into being a machinist. And then also related to that survivability, as we look at maybe some environmental issues that might present themselves, and you take someone that grew up farming in an area that may have been dry, there may have been a shortage of water. When we look at those issues now impacting the Western United States, it's that intellect, that mindset that we can take from those new Americans, apply that to the farming sector as well to survive and thrive working with less.
So to go back to what Darren and Jennifer were articulating earlier, so we have government representative, and we've got International Institute. Obviously, you said this is how it would change immigration. What is the job permit the biggest barrier to creating the first employee at one of our businesses here in the community? And if so, are we solely dependent on what's happening at the federal level? Or is there something we can do as a community that we have control over, more control over, that would initiate that job application, the job permit? If that is the number one barrier, at least that's what it sounded like, Jennifer, when you were describing it. When we have a government representative here, is that a barrier to get the process started with more companies like Bob's?
Can I answer it and then I'll let you jump in? So I'll answer your question with a yes and a no. Yes, the job permit is a barrier for the group of individuals who are seeking asylum because it's going to take them 6 months to 1 year to get work. So I'm referencing probably 600 individuals in our community who are at the hotels or the Vive shelter who are not yet eligible to work. So yes, that's a barrier. However, no, I do not think that there's a problem for employers here. I think there's ample labor supply coming in because refugee resettlement is bringing people in all the time now, and there's an upward trend. There is a political element to this, and that we'll see what happens with the next presidential election, but Biden has put in to continue to increase that number, and as the system gets sourced, more people are coming in. My agency was asked to give 3-year numbers of projections of how many we could help, and so we increased our numbers of who we would help. So each of the 4 agencies in town that do refugee resettlement have increased their numbers. I'm expecting that there will be about 2,500 refugees in the next year, and then from there maybe 2,500 to 3,000 the year after, while we wait on a political election cycle. That's people coming in.
To work?
They would come in eligible to work. Some of those are going to be kids. Some of them might have a medical condition, but that's at least 2,000 to 3,000 people coming in this year, 2024 coming up, and 2025, before possibly a presidential change. In the meantime, there's also other people who will come who will also be eligible to work, and those are what are referred to as secondary migrants. So an example is the Bengali population that Darren talked about, or other refugees. So we've talked about today populations coming from Burma, Sudan, Somalia, also Iraqis, Afghans, Colombians, there's a list of 8, I'm forgetting a few more, Eritreans. So they're all coming too. Buffalo resettles all of those populations. We're not limited to 1 or 2 populations, like for instance, Minnesota only takes in Somalis. We actually here have been open to all. So as a family is settled here, they may have a US tie that was settled somewhere else, and like Indiana or Texas, which isn't super friendly and doesn't provide a lot of support. So the minute their case management stuff runs out, they come here for secondary migration. So I think we have a pipeline, to give you a quick number answer, I think we have a pipeline of 3,000 people coming in within the next year. I think that's going to be buttressed by hundreds of others who will come here for secondary migration if we continue to be a welcoming community. And then in the meantime, the folks who are asylum seeking, I believe most of them have been put through a process where they're supposed to be applying and or have that EAD in process, so they may be eligible to work within the next year too. So I think we're going to have a bigger labor supply in the next year while we see what happens with the White House.
And I want to just give Bob so much credit. That shouldn't be glossed over what he's done. That is literally a textbook case study in diversity, equity, and inclusion, because you literally took the time to educate yourself first, and which is the most important piece. You own the company. So for diversity, equity, and inclusion to be effective, typically the leadership has to have the buy-in and believe. So also what you did too is in the sense of you made them feel included. So, you know, there's your inclusion piece, and then you're also giving them the tools that they need to basically be able to get the job done like all the other employees that you have. And that's just something, again, more companies need to take the time to do. What you saw was, wait a minute, have an individual here who works hard. If I just put a little bit of time and cultural competency into this, and you're like, wait a minute, wow, wait a minute. So to answer his question with the bottom line, what companies, I think they're starting to figure it out. A diverse company is usually a more profitable company because you're getting different things from different angles. So what you did, you found a group of employees that are hard workers, get the job done, and you said your quality control went up as well. So across the board on that, and now it's helping your company thrive, right? As opposed to a company who is just a less diverse, who won't take the chance and pour in some of that sweat equity. And then something to go back, I don't want to miss this one point, manufacturing jobs, you said it was 35,000 in the area, right? Now, isn't that weird? Because think about Buffalo, those who are born and raised in Buffalo. Remember, people about 15, 20 years ago were always like, well, where are the manufacturing jobs at? You know, I just want to go to high school, graduate, and then work in the plant. And, you know, we were saying, okay, you know, things are cyclical. They changed, right? They started going into more technology-based jobs and where you had to have some type of degree or certificate or what have you, but now the manufacturing jobs are back, but people have kind of moved on. If you want to say native-born Americans, whatever, have kind of moved on and started looking elsewhere, but now here are the manufacturing jobs again, but we don't supposedly have people to fill them, but no, they're out there, we just aren't looking in the right places, you know, and to help, or putting in the cultural competency to help make people feel welcome. You know, so nice job again, I have to compliment you on that.
Okay, we are just about out of time, so I want to...
I have one really quick question.
One quick question.
So sorry. I work in workforce development, recruitment, development, and retention exclusively in manufacturing and logistics. I've been doing it for 15 years. So my question is turnover. Do you see a reduction? Do you see increased tenure? Because I am a huge fan of this. I want to make that statement up front, right? Do you see a reduction in turnover with immigrant and refugee populations as opposed to native populations?
Yeah, the turnover rate is incredibly low. They're going to stay, especially when you invest in them, they're going to invest in you.
Right. Right. And I think, you know, there was a statement back here, and this is a piece of data that I use all the time, but generally turnover in manufacturing and logistics, we will look at somewhere between, it costs about 100 to 150% of their annual salary to replace them per person. At $15 an hour, state minimum wage, right, that's $30,000 a year, just over. So you're looking at about $65,000 per entry-level warehouse worker, right, in replacement when you look at training, lost productivity, all of those things. So when you can reduce your turnover rate, right, you can, it's an instant boost to the bottom line.
And I just add on turnover, and it goes to this whole education and empathy thing that we've been talking about. So I feel like I should mention that while we are a nonprofit, the Institute runs a interpreting and translation program, so you can hire us, which gives us money toward our bottom line, but we can translate your documents and training materials. We can bring in an interpreter for, you know, training sessions. We also run cultural competency programming, so we can come in and talk to your workforce about things like prayer rooms and understanding what people have gone through. And there's services like that in this town. Like, we're great, please support us. There's other resettlement partners in town that do that as well. Joblio, who's hosting this forum, also is in this space. But there's people here that in our community want to be welcoming, and that we don't have turnover at a job or departures from our city, right? We want this growth. We want people here to make Buffalo great. And so all of those pieces come into making sure that someone who doesn't speak English today, who's gone through trauma, can get settled, have a nice house, have their kids in school, have a job that's meaningful to them, start saving some money so they can buy their house, and become productive members of our community. And so every piece of the people who are here today, we're all stakeholders in that, which is making Buffalo great.
And last piece on that. Yeah, last piece. If you can help figure out solutions to transportation and English proficiency, that's what will help also retention, because oftentimes there's many people who want to work the jobs and do well, but they just cannot get there or afford to get there. So I know Buffalo Niagara Partnership is working on some solutions with that, but those seem to be the two biggest things. So, thank you for having us.
Round of applause for our panelists.